the session properly for us.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Isabel. So, welcome to the second seminar in the autumn 2022 edition of the CIMR Debate on Public Policy series. My name is Federica Rossi and I'm one of the Deputy Directors of CIMR. I am delighted to welcome you to our seminar and I hope that you will enjoy it and that you will participate in the debate. We have an hour, it is not a very long time, but I will try to facilitate a Q&A session at the end so we can have a bit of a discussion. The title of today's seminar is Innovation Policy and the COVID-19 Pandemic, What Role for Co-Creation and Crowdsourcing Instruments? And I am delighted to see that we have a nice audience, quite a sizable audience and a lot of experts in the audience, so hopefully we'll have a nice discussion about this. In the field of innovation policy, we've been talking for a long time about how collaboration and co-creation between different stakeholders is the way forward in order to deal with complex challenges. So the COVID-19 pandemic seems to provide an ideal test bed for this approach, since it has involved unprecedented challenges in terms of scale, scope, and importance. So how did governments fare in implementing co-creation approaches during the COVID-19 pandemic? In this seminar, we will hear from two research projects that have addressed precisely this question. The first is a project carried out by my colleague, Professor Motu de Silva, together with Nicolas Schmidt, Caroline Paunov, and Orla Lavelle, under the auspices of the OECD. The second is a project carried out by Dr. Annalisa Caloffi, Dr. Anna Kolovic, and myself. In their paper, Motu de Silva and her co-authors have carried out 30 case studies of COVID-19 co-creation initiatives from 21 countries and 3 transnational initiatives. So thanks to structured interviews with the leaders of these initiatives, they were able to draw important lessons about how these initiatives were carried out and what outcomes they achieved. Whereas in our study, Annalisa, Anna, and I have analyzed 158 idea crowdsourcing challenges issued on several crowdsourcing platforms in order to understand how these instruments was used during the pandemic. And we derived some useful knowledge about the different approaches to crowdsourcing that were taken by governments and private organizations in order to tackle difficult challenges. So as you can see, these two pieces of work complement each other really well. And I am delighted that we have an opportunity to discuss them together because I think that there are a lot of synergies between these two pieces of research, that the topic is really timely and important. Today, we had invited our colleague from the OECD Science and Technology Policy Division, Laura Krelling, to chair the debate. But unfortunately, Laura is ill and she's not able to join us today, so I will be chairing in her place. I am very sorry that Laura cannot join us. I'm sure the debate would have been even more exciting with her, but unfortunately she is not able to join us today and she told us how sorry she is that she cannot make it. So I will continue as the chair of the debate. I'm now leaving the floor to our presenters. Each research team will present their work for about 10-15 minutes, and this will be followed by a Q&A session. So I'm going to leave the floor to Muthu first with our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federica, for the fabulous introduction and also explaining the nature of the project. And I really hope Laura will feel better soon. And very nice to see everyone, and very nice afternoon to you all from sunny London. It's sunny today. Okay, so to start with, I'll try to share my screen first. So as Federica mentioned, the key objective of this project was to understand the nature of co-creation during the COVID-19 period. And I did it in collaboration with my colleagues at OECD. So this is an OECD-funded project. So in case you wonder, I'm sure most of you know what co-creation is, but just to set the ground, the co-creation involves joint production of innovation. So in order to produce innovation jointly, universities, businesses, government, intermediaries, and society would integrate their knowledge and skills resources, and network. So why do they do it? Because there is a common challenge that they would like to address. And then just to show you the two links to the two reports that we have already published. So in the first report, we present the 30 case studies with some form of comparison. And in the second report, we highlight what are the key practical and policy implications. Since these are OECD reports, these are not academic papers, but some level of academic rigor is there. But the main purpose of OECD reports is to offer some practical and policy insights, mainly the policy insights to inform the policies of OECD member states. So these two reports are built on the existing work carried out by my OECD colleagues as well as myself. But you could see all the links here. So as Federica mentioned, I'm not going to go into details here, but the main aim was to understand what are the key lessons that we can learn from co-creation during the COVID-19 period. And we have conducted 30 case studies from 21 countries and 3 transnational cases. So you could see the full list here, but you could read more from our reports. So very quickly to go through the key findings, but as I said, since this is not an academic paper, but we are developing academic papers from this, so these key findings are quite broader and also of relevance to policy and practice. So we have structured the key findings around 5 main questions. First, since the originality of this project is the co-creation during the pandemic, we wanted to discuss what was special about it. So second and third questions, as you could see, relate to the speed of delivery, which was a key unique outcome of all the initiatives. So we looked at the factors that enabled the quick setting up of co-creation initiatives and best practices adopted for speed delivery of solutions. So the learning on speed of delivery could be useful beyond the pandemic as well. During the non-pandemic period, we all would love to engage in speed up innovation processes. And finally, we also looked into the role of the government as the fourth question, as well as the factors determining the transferability of co-creation outcomes beyond the pandemic as the fifth question. So now I will very quickly go through some of the key findings under each of these questions. So as presented in this slide and the next slide, there were at least 12 unique features of co-creation initiatives in the COVID-19 context. So what was interesting from the analytical point of view was that these unique features gave us a test bed to check how the best practices could be used to enhance the success of future co-creation initiatives under such circumstances, because these circumstances could be even common to non-pandemic period. So I'll just highlight a few in this presentation, but you could read more in our reports. So for instance, there were several bottom-up initiatives, those initiated by non-traditional players such as startups. But the government interacted with them to further develop these solutions and then to become an end user. So such initiatives enable the integration of bottom-up and top-down approaches and offered a low-cost, efficient solutions. And also, there was a wide variety of actors from different sectors and disciplines participated in co-creation initiatives, including the government as an active collaborator. The large global networks were deployed to pool all available expertise to speed up the innovation process. Excuse me. So the other unique features of the COVID-19 circumstances are here. In a summary form, I could say that the use of big data, open source, social media, and accelerated approval were evident during this time. And then moving into the second question, what factors enabled the quick setup of new co-creation initiatives? So we have identified at least two factors. These two factors could even be applicable to non-crisis circumstances. First, having right incentives. So as you all may imagine, the main incentive for partners to engage in co-creation during the pandemic was to generate social value by offering solutions to the grand challenge. However, it was interesting that there were several other motives, as you could see in the slide, just the left-hand side, that complemented with the drive to generate social value. Therefore, especially when we co-create to generate social value, it is important to offer opportunities to achieve these additional motives as well. And second, urgent formation of co-creation initiatives was facilitated by adopting innovative ways to leverage existing networks, knowledge, technologies, infrastructure, and policy program structures. You could read more in the report because I should be completing the presentation in 10 to 15 minutes. And then quickly moving into the third question, how did co-creation practices adapt to the context of crisis in order to speed up solutions? We have identified at least 4 of such key adaptations. First, all the initiatives adopted agile management practices that enable the smooth operation. And second, we have also observed streamlining of processes that supported rapid and agile co-creation. So as you could see in the diagram, the streamlining of multiple processes and tools were evident. So these acted as a test bed to improve processes and tools beyond the pandemic period. And third, multidisciplinary teams were best prepared to generate impactful solutions. And they combined diverse range of expertise, technologies, and infrastructure from different disciplines that is required to address the grand challenge imposed by the pandemic. As you could see in the diagram in the right-hand side, combined disciplines range from medical sciences, computer data science, legal and regulatory expertise, public relations, marketing, social science, and policy expertise. So additionally, co-creation projects aimed at, So additionally, the co-creation projects aimed at manufacturing as the end product develop multidisciplinary production supply chains. So the multidisciplinarity usually we consider it as something taking long time. However, in this specific context, multidisciplinarity enabled quick speed up delivery of innovation. And fourth, we have also observed a wide range of instruments used by partners to respond to the challenges imposed by the pandemic. So these instruments were better suited for efficient co-creation. Digital platforms and tools facilitated matching partners and sharing and integrating data that enabled evidence-based decision and policy making. Hackathons also proved a particularly effective way to build new networks and facilitate co-creation. Funding was an important instrument for bringing together actors to co-create. We have observed this in many government-led medical innovations and umbrella programs for co-creation. So in particular, rapid delivery was facilitated by the improvements made to the project evaluation and funding allocation processes. also bring in multiple valuable partners through funding as an instrument was key for successful rapid co-creation. So that is the fourth question. What role did the government play in co-creation during the crisis? So the government was involved in nearly all of the co-creation initiatives. They played multiple roles of acting as an investor and regulator, enabler of rapid mobilization by using its power and network, by working closely with co-creation teams, by endorsing projects to increase stakeholder engagement and trust, and by directly leading co-creation initiatives to tackle the crisis. So the core strengths of the government, including vast knowledge on macroeconomic issues and social needs, convening power, as well as extensive network, could be capitalized on in future co-creation projects to enhance social value creation and to address grand challenges. And finally, the fifth question. So while co-creation during COVID-19 primarily aimed at resolving immediate challenges of the pandemic, some of the outcomes have generated innovation for future value. So these initiatives have adopted at least 4 key strategies. First, these initiatives have developed strategic plans on how to repurpose infrastructure developed or integrated for specific projects to serve beyond the pandemic. And second, even when resolving the pandemic imposed challenges, initiatives have identified challenges with broad applications beyond the pandemic. Especially when the government was involved in projects, they defined challenges with broad applications, which has resulted in many funded projects offering innovation of future value. Third, developing products with commercial applications beyond the pandemic has also resulted in commercialization beyond the pandemic. Fourth, recognizing commercial opportunities while addressing social needs was important to take the co-creation experience forward in financially sustainable and scale-up manner. So these are the kind of key findings. As you could see, as I also started mention at the beginning, this is not an academic paper. Therefore, you could see many broader level of findings, but we are now developing academic papers from this. So I would like to now conclude the presentation and hand over to Federica. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Muthu. I am going to leave the floor to the next speakers, and I would like to invite our audience to put any questions they might have in the chat so that we can ask those questions later. Okay, so I'm going to leave the floor to Anna, I believe, who is going to start with the presentation.
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting us to talk about our research, which was conducted during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. And I'm going to start the presentation and then hand over to Annalisa, who will continue with the presentation after my introduction. So we will talk about our research on crowdsourcing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Crowdsourcing is a practice it's a tool of open innovation. It is when the seeker tries to find solutions from the crowd by issuing an open call. And there are many different platforms that are used to issue this kind of challenges. They can be ideation challenges, they can be looking for solution type of challenges, or hackathons. Different types of challenges can be issued through these platforms. So COVID-19 is a global wicked problem. It means that it affects all aspects of our life and different populations worldwide. It has triggered very strong measures by governments, both in terms of R&D and also in the economic spheres. And crowdsourcing has played a particular role in this context. Actually, the trigger for our own research was the fact that we could see in the news that the different constituents were using crowdsourcing to try to find solutions to the problems that were posed by the pandemic. The crowdsourcing used by the government was enabled by the increasing use of digital technologies by public institutions, public administrations, and in particular, the governments use crowdsourcing to solve several different kinds of problems that are of use to also citizens. So they involve citizens in solving these problems. So why was crowdsourcing used in COVID-19? Well, the idea was to respond quickly and creatively to the urgent needs of the population. So the highlights of our work are that we investigated actually how public administrations have used crowdsourcing. So in particular, we focused on public organizations, public institutions. And we wanted to find out to what extent crowdsourcing has been instrumental in promoting open innovation and service co-creation. And to do so, we first developed a conceptual typology of crowdsourcing challenges based on two dimensions, the degree of their openness and the degree of co-creation or collaboration between the seeker and the solver. We used this empirical evidence that we collected in 2020 and 2021, and our goal was to examine the extent to which these types that we have predefined in our theoretical or conceptual framework have been used in practice. And our findings are a little bit nuanced because we expected to see a lot of openness in these challenges, given the specificity of COVID-19, but actually we found that not everything is open and not everything is based on collaborative processes. So about our conceptual framework, when we talk about platform government, this is a kind of new type of government where the platforms are used to conduct specific activities by governments and public administrations. So there are three main features of public administration. The first one is this extensive use of platforms. So new digital technologies are used in the design and implementation of public services. The second feature is the presence of some degree of co-creation between the users of the service and the ones that design the service, so between the governments and the citizens. And the third feature is that services develop as a result of the availability of information, data, or software that are to some extent open. So if we look at these three features, we see that among these, feature one is always present in crowdsourcing because the platforms are always used in crowdsourcing, whereas features 2 and 3 could be used to different degrees. So we use these two last features, features 2 and 3, to develop our conceptual typology of types of crowdsourcing challenges. So if we have the degree of openness on the horizontal axis and the degree of co-creation on the vertical axis, we can identify 4 different types of crowdsourcing challenges. So if the degree of openness is low and the degree of co-creation is low, we have a type of challenge that we call e-procurement, which is very close to traditional procurement. It's just that it is done over the internet platform. When the degree of openness is high and the degree of co-creation is low, we have the release of public data. When we have a degree of openness that is low, but degree of co-creation high, then we talk about elicitation of ideas. And finally, when both dimensions are high, so high degree of openness and high degree of co-creation, we have open co-creation. So this is the typology that is a little bit theoretical, because we can imagine that between these different types, we could have other more nuanced types, but we use this typology to classify the challenges that we identified during the data collection. And I will now hand over to Annalisa to continue the presentation.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we collected our data. Shall I share mine? Okay.
Sorry. I don't know. Do you see my screen or?
You've just stopped sharing, Anna, but I think, oh, there we go.
Do you see mine?
Yes.
Okay. I'll take from here. Okay, so we collected our data from 20 different internet platforms. Some of them were specifically created to tackle the problems related to the pandemic, such as the data for COVID-19 leading repository, but we also collected data from Innocentive, Innoget, Kaggle, or all the others, most famous crowdsourcing platforms. We collected data in two time periods, April-September 2020 and October-November 2021, which means in two different waves of the pandemics. And we collected information in total on 158 challenges, of which 83 were either fully public, and by fully public, we mean challenges that were launched and funded by a public administration, or by a public-private partnership. In this table, we have summarizes some of the general features of the crowdsourcing challenges. I will not dwell too much on this table, but it's interesting to note that, as you can see in the first row of the table, half of the challenges that we collected information about were funded and launched by national governments, while on the other hand, local governments have made, at least during the COVID, a very limited use of these crowdsourcing platforms, as only 4.2% of the challenges were funded by local governments. On the other hand, research organizations were publicly funded. In this case, research organizations were quite active. 22.9% of the challenges were funded by research organization alone, and another 12.5% by research plus governments. But let me go directly to the two main variables of interest that Anna was mentioning before: the degree of co-creation between seekers and solvers, and the degree of openness of the solution. How did we operationalize these variables? As for the degree of co-creation, we took into account first the level of detail of the tasks and the time frame in which they were to be carried out as specified by the seeker in the description of the challenge. And we consider a high level of detail corresponding to a situation in which the seeker ex ante specify all the details of the desired solution. So a little room is left for the collaboration with the solver, because it's something quite top down, very much specified ex ante by the seeker. On the other hand, we have a low level when the details of the challenge or of the desired solution are not very much specified ex ante. Plus, we also considered whether what was the openness in terms of participation to the challenge. and in particular, whether the participation as solvers of the challenge was open in terms both of participants' location and participants' types or not. It was restricted to participants coming from one or more countries, or only organizations, only individuals, and something like that. As for the degree of openness of the solution, we considered whether the participants, the solvers, were explicitly required to share their data, the data that they used in order to provide the solution, either by publishing this information on the crowdsourcing platform or on another website. Plus, we also considered how IPR and licensing were managed by the seekers and the solvers. Going quite quickly to the results. This is the same framework, the same figure that Anna showed you before, which was our theoretical framework. Now, as you can see, the different boxes are colored with different shades of blue, ranging from the light blue of the elicitation of ideas, which is actually the smallest group in our database, as only about 10% of the challenges are actually classifiable in this way, following the two main variables that I described before, although quite quickly. The dark blue is that of the e-procurement group, which is the largest group in our database. In fact, about 40% of the challenges belong to this group. The other two groups, the open co-creation and the release of public data, collect about 25% of the challenges each. So basically, I put it very simply, this is the first result that we got. As the challenges that we analyzed were more similar to the traditional procurement than to the open co-creation that we usually think about when we think about the crowdsourcing challenges. So even if the public administration that we are analyzing were using digital tools, they were using it in a rather, let's say, traditional way. Then we tried to identify what were the typical characteristics of these four different types of challenges. And we found out that challenges in the e-procurement group were launched mainly by governments located in less experienced countries. And by less experienced country, we refer to those countries that have experienced less in terms of where the use of digital platforms and the crowdsourcing platforms in particular is less important than in other countries. And these challenges were about the creation of all types of innovations. And by all types of innovations, we mean that these challenges were about the production of new goods and services that could have been used both for business or social purposes. On the other hand, the open co-creation challenges are characterized by, they are mainly launched by public-private partnerships. They are launched basically by the more experienced countries, namely the US, but not only the US. Again, they are about the creation of all types of new goods and services. Elicitation of ideas are characterized by the fact that they are funded by mixed partnerships, again, but they focus more on business innovations, on the production of new goods and services that can have commercial opportunities. While on the other hand, we have the release of public data that these challenges were basically launched mainly by international organizations. The EU was very much active in this group of challenges. So going very quickly to the conclusion, actually, we do not have a proper conclusion as this is an ongoing research. What are we doing now is we are trying to interview public administration in order to understand why they implemented the crowdsourcing challenges, and in particular, what were the outcome of these challenges, as Muthu showed before. What these challenges were about is, of course, a very important part of the story that we want to investigate more. We are, of course, also trying to expand our observation to non-COVID challenges in order to expand also our theoretical framework. So thank you very much for your attention. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Thank you very much, Muthu and Anna. Okay, so we've seen a couple of our presentations where, I mean, it is interesting that we see different sides to the co-creation issue. On the one hand, co-creation initiatives appear to have played an important role during the pandemic, and they seem to have led to positive experiences. I think it will be interesting to see what comes out from your more fine-grained analysis of the data, Muthu, because, you know, particularly in relation to what role the government precisely played in these initiatives. Because when we look at the paper on crowdsourcing, it's interesting that we find some unexpected results. So, you know, crowdsourcing has been used, but not as widely as we thought. And the evidence suggests that crowdsourcing is not always used to support open innovation processes, but sometimes it's associated with closed innovation practices, such as limiting the pool of potential solvers, limiting the dissemination of information about winning ideas, and so on. So it's interesting to see the potential, you know, what are the limits of the action of the government, and what is the pulls the government back from being extremely co-creative, right? So very quickly, I just would like to ask a couple of questions to the speaker. The first question is, based on your finding, what are the 2 key actions that you would wish to see following what you've learned? And what important research question do you think should be addressed based on your findings? If you could answer this in a couple of minutes, we'll then take some questions from the audience. I can see there are lots, so thank you.
Should we go in the reverse order?
It's up to you. Yes, if Annalisa and Anna want to respond first, and then Muthu, that's fine.
Yes, so maybe I can start and Annalisa can join me. I will start with the last question. What research questions do you see for the future? I think we really need to, in terms of crowdsourcing, we really need to dig deeper into the rationale of the governments for using crowdsourcing, and if crowdsourcing is actually the most appropriate tool for reaching specific goals. So linking the goals and the tools that are used to reach these goals. I think this is something that is interesting. And another research question that I see is, what would be the obstacles to governments' use, more important use, not only of crowdsourcing, but of open innovation more generally? Because we were a little bit disappointed by the level of openness and by the level of use of crowdsourcing during the pandemic. We expected to see more of it. So I think it would be interesting to see what makes the governments hesitate to use crowdsourcing. I'll leave to Annalisa.
Yeah, yes, I very much agree with Anna's reply. It will be very interesting to understand what is the plus of using these crowdsourcing platforms for the government. And in terms of action, I would like to see a wider range of organizations trying to experiment with these new tools, because it's not by chance that as we have seen, local governments in those that we labeled as less experienced countries are experimenting less with the digital technologies, because of course, public administration will be more likely to experiment with these new technologies the higher the level of digital literacy of the public administration itself. So, I would like to see more wider number of organizations trying to experiment and to understand what is the plus, what are the outcomes of these experiments. Was it worth experimenting or not?
Thank you very much. So if I go in now, so in terms of two key takeaways for policy and practice, I would highlight during the COVID-19 period, governments have realized the value of co-creation. So for instance, last week, one of the leaders of co-creation, that is Oxford AstraZeneca, I invited him to speak to my students. And what he said was, now the government think that the solution for everything is co-creation. So that's going into the other end. But it's interesting to understand or realize the value of co-creation, and there is a greater tendency for governments to engage in co-creation, which is slightly contradictory to what you say. Perhaps I'm talking about co-creation in a broader sense rather than the crowdsourcing per se. Because the co-creation initiatives that we have studied, like majority of them, they were involved in generating some sort of solid innovations like product services. So in addition to the ideas, so that's one thing. And also in relation to that, it's about the role of the government. So the government have become co-creators. So that was really interesting. So from the government policy making perspective, they have realized they could capitalize on co-creation to resolve a lot of socioeconomic challenges. So that's one. And the second is for the practice. I think our work has highlighted different models that could be used for co-creation, because we all know one size fits all won't work. But I don't have time to go into details here, but the suitability of different models of co-creation to achieve different purposes, especially how you could integrate commercial value generation with social value generation so that you could secure co-funding as well. You don't have to rely on government funding. You could secure co-funding as well as you could scale up the generation of social value, and you could make sure that generation of social value is sustainable when it is integrated with the generation of commercial value. So these are the two kind of takeaway points for policy and practice. In terms of future research, since this is a very broad kind of paper, the report, there are many potentials to develop work, but currently I'll just share with you, if you can see the screen, the two work that we are currently engaged in. So I hope you could see my screen there. So as I have presented in the presentation as well as in the report, we have rich material on 30 co-creation case studies from 21 countries and three transnational initiatives. So we are now further analyzing data, at least to write two papers. But one example, the one paper, is to understand how to engage in rapid interdisciplinary co-creation. So this is because usually it is considered that interdisciplinarity co-creation is less efficient and more suitable for long-term projects. But on the contrary, as I have discussed, during the pandemic, we have observed efficient interdisciplinary co-creation. So all our cases involve some type of interdisciplinarity, ranging from combining diverse expertise, technologies, infrastructure, and supply chains. So this offers a test bed to study how behavioral practices of co-creation unit enable efficient interdisciplinary co-creation. So you could see in the slide what are the key efficiency gain practices that we have identified through the initial analysis. I'm not going to go into details, but I thought I'll just highlight it. But there are, if you can think of any other lenses to further analyze the data presented in two reports, I have just presented the two reports, please feel free to write to us. So I'm happy to discuss with our OECD colleagues as well. But in addition to this one, we are also working on a paper on digital proximity. So these are the future research exactly coming from the work. So additionally, but this is a future project. We are conducting a study in the context of supporting co-creation for collaborative transition. So we are developing a number of case studies on co-creation projects involving universities, businesses, and other actors to jointly develop innovative solutions for green transitions. The aim of these case studies is to understand the features of the initiative, the role and motivation of actors, project outcomes, and more importantly, lessons learned and success factors. So again, this is a work that I'm doing with OECD. So please stay tuned, and we will share with you some of the findings possibly next year. Thank you very much.
Like there's a lot going on, Muthu, from this project. Sounds great. Can you just maybe pick up on a couple of questions from the chat before allowing a couple of people in the audience to ask questions? There were some questions from a little while ago in the chat, but I think I can combine them actually because they were on a similar topic. One was about giving us some examples of, from your rich data set. Can you just give us some example of a couple of co-creation initiatives? And the other questions were about involving startups and small companies, small actors in these processes. What do you need to do to involve them? Did they play a role? What role did they play? How could they get involved in this process? And I think there was a question from Shanta Yap about how do you get all stakeholders on board in other non-life threatening situations. So do you think you can address these in sort of together if you can?
Thank you very much, Federica. So I think the answers to many questions are in the report. So I highly recommend you reading reports. But just to this is a kind of slide that I presented. So these are the examples. So if I just highlight a few of these examples, we did a case study on Oxford AstraZeneca. As well as ventilator challenge program, both are from the UK, and also EU versus virus. So that's one of the the crowdsourcing platforms that they had. So perhaps something of interest to you, and also from these different countries as well. And also from US, the Covid-19, I think that's where they used Kaggle challenge as well. So another something that you have also studied on the crowdsourcing side, and also HPC consortium. So these are several examples, but you could read more from the report. And then the role of the startups. Yes, I fully agree with the comment, the startups, they may have found it difficult to engage. However, during the COVID-19 period, we saw the magic. The government, who is unlikely to rely on startups, they did rely on startups in certain projects. I mean, startups engage in the project as the initiator. So still government relied on them because they had some of the unique strengths, like being able to deliver something very quickly, and the digital ability, the digital capabilities that they had, and also some of the dynamic capabilities that they had, which other bureaucratic organizations did not have, like flexibility, innovativeness. So government and other actors in the ecosystem were able to capitalize on these strengths of the startups to deliver outcomes rapidly. The key point here is the rapidly. So, and the question by Shanta, I think that I could give a very lengthy answer, but to bring everyone together, key aspects during the non-COVID period, like the motivation, that's relevant to non-pandemic period as well. Yes, urgency, we cannot recreate urgency. However, offering other ways to engage, achieve their motivations, That would be one possibility. And also to think about the potential transferability of outcomes for the non-pandemic period, because the last slide I had was what activities, what actions have made sure the transferability of outcomes for the future. So if these things have given the kind of enable other actors or incentivize other actors to engage in co-creation, and this could be applied during non-pandemic period as well, but many other things as well, even interdisciplinarity, lessons learned based on the interdisciplinarity. But I suggest that please have a look at the report. I think I'll give Federica the time so that they could get a few other questions from other excellent team clarified as well.
Thank you. Yes, there are questions from Grazia and from Fumi. So I perhaps would like ask Grazia and Fumi to ask their questions so that we answer all questions. Then you both can answer the questions at the end. Okay, Grazia, thank you.
Thank you, Federica. First of all, I want to congratulate for a very interesting study, and which is something which will be useful. However, I'm sure that you yourself consider it as a kind of starting point. And what I would like to ask you is to concentrate your mind quite a lot on the following. What could we, if we have the same situation again, and clearly creation is very important, what mistakes which were done the first time around should be avoided? What were the problems which we could have done without? And can they be avoided in the future? Whether the future means generating co-creation in normal times, or whether it is due to in another exceptional situation like a pandemic, because I'm afraid, I'm sure we will have some other exceptional case as well. Thank you.
Thank you,
not really a question, it's more an encouragement and asking you whether you are planning something like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Grazia. Fumi, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks to all the speakers and Federica for the sharing. Yeah, my question is probably related to what Grazia just sort of said. I was just sort of wondering about the temporality of COVID-19. I mean, obviously, things happened over 2 years, probably a bit longer anyway. So I think it would be interesting to kind of contextualize when, at which timing and in what forms the co-creation happened and how that evolved over time. And then I think like to Anna and Knusok Koser's paper, which sort of channel the actors decide to take. So are there any change over the time, or is it something they're already co-creating anyway, or the co-creation happened as an immediate response to the crisis, or is it incremental change over the duration of the crisis? So you could probably make different trajectories of co-creation over time. So I just wondered if you could add a bit of view on that.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we've got time for a round of answer to these two very, very broad and challenging questions, really, we are thinking about.
If you want, I could go first. So, and thank you very much, both of you, really great comments. And the first, it's about what mistakes that may have done during the COVID-19 period that we should avoid. Graciela, just to highlight that, because what we also learned was some of the mistakes that we did before the pandemic, because of the urgency to respond, they tried to overcome those mistakes during the pandemic because it was a test bed. So a few things I would like to highlight was the first, the regulatory approval like for medical innovation, and they improved the process, and the second proposal evaluation process. So they improved the process. So there were a lot of mistakes, bureaucratic processes we had prior to the pandemic. Because of the urgency to respond, they have overcome some of the issues by responding to those mistakes, and by making those mistakes, by improving the processes. So that's something that we studied. But in terms of going forward, we mainly found the best practices that were adopted during the pandemic. However, as you said, it also gave us a lens to look at what are the mistakes that had happened during the pandemic that they could overcome. So these were like the analysis that I have presented, the broad analysis I have presented included some of the learning based on the mistakes as well. But I think it's really good lens to look at. Thank you very much. And the other one, I think about the temporality, the FOMI was discussing, and also to some extent, Graciela was also mentioning about the uniqueness of the pandemic context. I think these are really important ones, but especially in terms of the uniqueness of the pandemic, and how can we generalize the findings to pandemic and non-pandemic time. We have done it to some extent in the report. However, the journal articles that we are producing, we explicitly built on these areas because the COVID-19 pandemic offered us a test bed to check under different circumstances which of these things would work. So we kind of divided, or we kind of break down the COVID-19 pandemic into some of the unique features. So then we try to generalize based on this kind of breakdown of unique features. So that would come up more strongly in our publication, like academic publications. But here in the report, you could see some level of discussion. The temporality, that's a really interesting element for me. We have some data on how the co-creation initiatives evolved, like key milestones of the co-creation initiative during the pandemic, because some of the co-creation initiatives, they built on existing co-creation initiatives as well. So there is a potential to analyze it from that lens. Thank you very much. We did not have time to do it, but perhaps it might be a future potential paper. And both Gracia and Fumi, you are welcome to work with us if you are interested in, because as you could see, like this work could be cut into different pieces by looking at it from different lenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I will quickly give a few thoughts and then let Annalisa. I think what we learned by analyzing our challenges in our database is that very often they lacked precision. Actually, the competencies that were required to solve the challenges were not very clearly spelled out. And I think the governments need to learn about, how to formulate, how to reach the right audience, because by formulating very confusing challenges, it is very unlikely that you will actually get the expertise that you need to solve the challenges. Another point, and I see that it was already in the discussion by Daniele, very low level of outbound openness we found. So the IPR and the diffusion of data was quite low. So I think it is not really open, very open. So indeed, I agree that these things have to be discussed and decided and elaborated on, and made better in the future.
Yeah, I will add up my comment on IPR, which is a very sensitive point. We are learning about the mistakes and the problems that the governments had during the COVID, thanks to our interviews to these people. And actually, one of the important points is for these organizations how to learn to handle all these issues that are related to IPR, because they are not so simple. Of course, we can call for, we can prefer, imagine that the preferable situation would be that of having open and complete diffusion of the information, but this is not always the case, and for good reasons in some cases. So we are really interested in dig a little bit more on this issue, which is quite important. And as for the analysis over time, this is a very important point. Fumi, thank you very much. We are trying to do that because we are still collecting information on additional crowdsourcing challenges. So as I said before, this is an ongoing project. So we are very open to your suggestion. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time. So thank you very much to our speakers for their contribution. And thank you very, very much to our audience for their very, very interesting and challenging questions and for this high level of engagement. So I do hope that everyone will come away from this seminar having learned something useful, and yeah, hopefully, you know, let's continue discussing these things, and maybe new collaborations and the new research avenues and new actions will emerge from this debate. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope we'll see you again very soon. There is another CIMR event. I think it's on the 9th of November, the next one. Helen, is that correct?
Yes,
So,
Marian's here, but yes,
yeah.
so we'll be sending out details. But thank you very much, Federica. Thank you, Isabel. It's been a terrific. I love the juxtaposition of the two papers. There's so much to learn from each other. So well done, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. So see you soon.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.